So the first thing I wanted to talk about is ergonomics, or at least give some of my thoughts on ergonomics, primarily coming from my perspective, but I just wanted to share some insights that I specifically have with ergonomics. And I primarily want to do this because I need an excuse to explain why I now use a trackball instead of a standard mouse. And I thought talking about ergonomics would be a great excuse to dive into that. So yes, I use a trackball now, which is pretty crazy to say, but I want to explain why. So first of all, my old mouse, which I have right here, this is the second one that I have of this same exact model, and one of the primary problems that it has is sometimes when I click just once, it ends up doing like a double or triple click, even though I physically pressed it once only. And that's pretty annoying. And this is the second mouse that experiences the same thing, so I don't recommend this model. I went out of my way to make sure that no like crumbs or anything get in there. I've determined that it's most likely a fault in the button itself. Like there's just a design flaw in this particular model. So I mean, if you don't have the problem and you have this model, that's probably fine, but if you're getting a new mouse, I probably wouldn't recommend this model. It's gonna have button issues down the line. So that's one reason why I now have this mouse, which I'm gonna go over in a bit. But another reason is sometimes I tend to have extreme RSI-like symptoms in my hand. So RSI stands for repetitive strain injury. And sometimes when I use the computer for extended periods of time, I get extreme pain in my wrist. I would probably describe it as my wrist getting whacked with a hammer several times per second. It is not a fun feeling at all. And that tends to happen if I use this quite vigorously for long periods of time. So with those two things combined, I've decided my next mouse is going to be an ergonomic one. So for work, I went to a client site and they had an ergonomic mouse that kind of had an orientation where rather than being oriented like this, it was a bit oriented off to the side. So notice how my hand is kind of tilted more than just being straight. When I used that mouse, I was like, this feels so nice. I have to get a mouse like this. I bet you it would help with my RSI symptoms when that happens. So yeah, I decided to just get another mouse. I was looking at some options. I found this on Amazon. Then I also found it at a local store too. And I decided while I'm there, I may as well get it from there. I was originally just going to get a normal mouse that's angled to the side like this one. So like a normal mouse is kind of straight, whereas this one's more angled like this, which is supposed to feel more natural. I was originally just going to get a normal mouse that does that rather than like a trackball. But a lot of the options I was looking at were quite expensive, and this trackball one was a cheaper option compared to a lot of the other ones. And at first I thought the trackball was meant for scrolling. Like if I could scroll with my thumb, that'd be kind of cool, to be honest, especially if it had smooth scrolling. But that's how you control the cursor. So this mouse doesn't actually move at all. It's meant to be controlled like that. So I'm controlling this cursor with the trackball right now. And I do that all with my thumb. And it definitely takes some getting used to if you're used to moving it around with your wrists. But man, let me tell you, it feels awesome once you do get used to it. That feeling that I can move the cursor a long distance without physically moving my wrists at all, there's just something that's really awesome about that. I don't need drugs when I have this. This feels so great on my hands. So yeah, when you get used to that, then I would say it's definitely worth it. It does take some getting used to, like I said, but if you're concerned about ergonomics like me, like I've had some pretty severe symptoms at some point. I've had it happen like when I woke up too, and there's so many things I'd rather experience than that extreme pain in my hand. I would take a double ear infection over this. So, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I originally wanted to get a normal mouse, but I didn't realize this was a trackball and you control it with the cursor. It took a little bit of getting used to, but once I started using it, I started seeing the value in that. I was originally a little bit concerned that now I'm moving my thumb a lot more vigorously, and is that going to become a problem? Well, I don't think it's going to after using it for a while. Compared to how I was moving my wrist, this is nothing. So I will take this over that. There is definitely, I think a lot of my pain was probably coming from how much I was moving my wrist. And then another thing that I'm not 100% sure this is true, but it seems to be true from my testing over the years, is I used to have my fingers curled up like this on the mouse, which I think that definitely aggravated the RSI symptoms a lot more. Whereas when I have my fingers rested like this, kind of flat against it, that feels a lot better. I was doing that with this mouse too. Yeah, it's kind of tempting to go like this, but I noticed that the symptoms happen way less when I go like this. I think there's a correlation, but I don't know if that actually improves stuff. But yeah, I started doing this, and then I was also trying to minimize wrist movement by trying to move my whole arm rather than going like this. Doing this all the time, I can tell that pain is going to happen if it hasn't started yet. It's not worth it, so I try to get used to moving my whole arm, which definitely takes some getting used to, but oh my gosh. I don't know if you realize this, but while I'm holding this mouse, notice how my hand naturally turned a little bit? That shows you how much more natural this position is than this. There's definitely some merit in being in a more natural position. But yeah, I was trying to minimize wrist movement. With this mouse, there is a lot less wrist movement. I literally only use a trackball and press buttons on it now. My wrist stays pretty much still. You don't even need a mouse pad now, which is kind of nice as well. I still have my mouse pad here, but it's not technically needed because the mouse is stationary at pretty much all times. So when I first started getting used to this, I will mention that it is a bit of a pain to get used to at first, but I would say the secret is to speed up the cursor speed. Because when you first use it, the cursor hardly moves at all. You make large movements and the cursor doesn't move very much. Like you do a full circle. That's another weird thing with this. I can shake it, then the cursor moves. But you basically do a full motion, and this is about all it moves right there. But if you speed up the cursor speed, then you can move it across the screen pretty effortlessly. I barely have to move it at all. See, watch. And then there's the mouse acceleration too. That can get across the screen pretty easily. So I would say the secret to getting used to this is to dial in your cursor speed. I wouldn't go with the default one. I'd probably speed it up a fair bit and get used to that from the very start. So I tried to mess with the Windows setting. So if you go to Control Mouse, then you can change your pointer options and increase or decrease this. I would leave that alone and instead download the drivers for it. There's a fully fledged software you can get for this particular Logitech Ergo M575, I think it is. Something like that. You can probably find a model. It's a Logitech Ergo mouse basically. But I would definitely recommend this is the driver software right here. I was kind of reluctant to get it at first, but after trying it out, the customization that it provides, I think is totally worth getting the software. It works on Windows and Mac. I'm not sure about Linux, probably not. I haven't really done it in Linux, but I would recommend going to here and setting the pointer speed here rather than the control panel. I would not set it here. Leave this at the default and then set the speed here. I don't know what it is, but it feels more natural to change this speed than the other one. I'm not exactly sure why. The cursor feels like it shakes a little bit more when I set the Windows or even the Mac cursor speed. I'd rather set it in this software. Something about it feels more natural when you set this one versus the other one. Not exactly sure what it is, but you will also find that if you set the speed to 100%, man, you can really make a lot of movements with very little thumb movement. It might be worth getting used to that if you want to minimize thumb movement, but I find that this is a pretty good speed on Windows, especially with multiple monitors. I find that with a full thumb movement, it goes over about 1.5 monitors worth of pixels on a 1080p screen. And I can definitely overshoot if I want to go more than that. That's actually quite easy to get used to as well. So yeah, if you're learning to get used to this, the secret is to figure out your ideal pointer speed. And I would do that with this software. Yeah, there's my model up there. But yeah, I would use this software, dial in on the ideal mouse speed. I found that when it was going really fast, if my hands happened to be shaking at the time, like if it was lunchtime and I was starving, you could definitely tell. You don't want to be using the computer, then people can tell you're hungry for lunch based on how your cursor moves. I would say that if you set the cursor speed in this software, that's a lot less prone than if you set the operating system's cursor speed using this, for example. So you're probably thinking you have to download this whole software just to change the cursor speed. First of all, the way it handles the change, I think is way better than the operating system does it. I don't know what it is, but it feels a lot more smooth and stable, first of all. And second of all, this mouse actually comes with a couple buttons by the left click. Not sure if you noticed that. You can map them to do pretty much anything you want. I never had that on any of my previous mice, so not only is this an ergonomic mouse, but it has a bunch of buttons on it for easy usage as well. So what I most commonly like to use it with is, most of the time I have this button, the bottommost one, act as a back button because I often go back on a web browser or the file explorer or even some of my other software. That is really handy to have on the mouse. A lot of times I find my hand on the mouse and I'm not even touching the keyboard, and I'm almost as efficient as using the keyboard because of that one button. It's pretty nice. Then I use the other button to close out an application. However, for some programs like the web browser, I have it close a tab rather than the whole application. So you can have application-specific mappings. You can even have application-specific pointer speeds as well, which is quite wild. I don't personally see the use in that, but I can see how that would be useful, maybe in some niche cases. But yeah, so some software, I like to have it close a tab rather than the whole window. I can set that all right here. It's pretty nice. That's what I would say makes it worth getting the software. You can remap the left and right keys too, I think. I know you can remap the middle button, that's for sure. Sometimes I'm never going to use the middle button in like Windows Explorer, for example, so I think I remapped that to something else. Yeah. The only time I use it is if I'm opening another window. You could middle click on a taskbar icon and open up another instance of a program. Most programs work with that anyway. But I have it mapped to minimize the window because sometimes I want to minimize an Explorer window rather than closing it. that's my mapping. You figure out what works best for you if you're ever gonna do something like this. There's quite a bit of customization. That's the beauty of it. Figure out what works best for you and set it up exactly how you want it to be. This is how I personally have it. So yeah, given the fact that you can do application specific mappings as well as just the way it controls the pointer speed, that's what I think makes it worth getting the software. It's kind of a pain to get set up. You have to download additional software, but once you do, I think it makes the mouse so much more usable than it is at stock settings. One thing I will point out is if you do get the software, I would maybe disable the auto update. There should be an option on here if you have the latest version to disable the auto update on the Logitech software. Can't quite remember how to access that page, but there should be some way to do it. If there's not, you could probably add a firewall rule so that the software can't make outgoing connections and fetch updates and stuff. One thing you can also do is disable auto updates as you're installing it. I learned this the other day. You could provide some command line arguments when you run the program. In command prompt, reference the executable. I personally type cmd in the address bar to open it in the current Explorer directory. You may also be able to create a shortcut and modify the target field to pass arguments to the installer. I start typing the case-sensitive name of the installer, and after a few letters, hit tab to autofill. Then do /update no. You may also disable analytics with /analytics no. See the article linked in the description. Then run through the installer and the settings should be applied. I believe the commands are originally meant to provide finer control over automatic driver deployment to several computers. So, yeah. Because I actually had an update on this software last night and it took like 20 minutes to get it running again because it was stuck trying to update. I mean, Logitech, if you're going to update the software, at least make it seamless so that it doesn't prevent me from using your product. I couldn't really use the right pointer speed and button mappings while it was updating, and let me tell you, that was annoying. So yeah, for that reason, I might consider disabling auto updates just so that doesn't happen. So yeah, I now use a trackball and I don't think I can go back after switching to this. I'm very used to this. One thing I will also point out is sometimes the trackball can build up friction over time. And I think that's because there's some grime or gunk that gets stuck in there over time, so you can actually push inside of here to take the trackball out. You could use it like a ball if you want, but you'll notice on the inside, if you look on the inside, there's a little bit of stuff that builds up over time. It's probably like salt from my hands or something like that, but I would take a napkin or something and then just kind of clean it out. That'll get rid of some of the friction that builds up over time. That may not sound like a big deal at first, but if you build coordination from the mouse speed and how it feels, friction will throw everything off. That was one weird thing that I experienced. I did not know that friction builds up, and then all of a sudden it started to feel like it was harder and harder to use it. And then I started getting used to it with the friction buildup. Then when I cleaned it up, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so much smoother and slipperier. And all of a sudden I had to get used to that again. So I usually clean it out like every couple days maybe. A little bit annoying, but I like it when it feels nice and smooth with very little friction. So yeah, other than that, it works pretty much like a normal mouse. It is worth pointing out that it's designed for the right hand, so I'm not sure if there's a left hand variant. If you are going to use it with your left hand, it probably would work. It's just you'd have to get used to this orientation. You'd also have to get used to using your pinky to move the cursor around. If you can do that, it'll probably work for you as well. But if you are left-handed and you use your mouse with your left hand, then you might want to look at some other option besides this one. But yeah, I think this was kind of an interesting endeavor that I didn't even know I was going to undertake. I literally bought it on a day that I pulled an all-nighter. Here I am with sleep deprivation. Suddenly I switched to a trackball, and I'm like, I gotta get some sleep now. What am I even doing here? I made such a weird decision while I was on very little sleep, and here we are now. I don't regret it though, but you can see how I would depending on what decisions I'm making. But yeah, if you're close to getting RSI like symptoms like I was, I don't know if I fully have RSI, but most of the time I'm fine. But every once in a while, especially if I'm doing long session where I use vigorous wrist movements over a long period of time, that's when it really starts to act up. And it is not fun at all. I would say, like, if you're not going to switch over and you're experiencing those symptoms, you might find it helpful to have your hands resting flat rather than curled up if you were doing it curled up before. Try to get into the habit. It will take some getting used to, but I think it goes a long way. I've definitely noticed a lot less symptoms since I started doing that. That could be why, I'm not really sure, but definitely doesn't hurt to do that. It certainly hasn't made it any worse. And then also, rather than moving your wrists a lot, try getting used to just doing arm movements. It's going to be a pain to get used to, but I think it's probably better for ergonomics. And then I also used to think that using a touchpad would be more ergonomic friendly than using a mouse like I was before, but I find that it doesn't. I find that a trackpad is probably even worse than using a mouse like I just described. So I also try to minimize trackpad usage because in my experience, I have had aggravated symptoms using the trackpad a lot as well. Regarding the trackpad stuff, I've also heard some people using a stylus on it. You can hold it like this and then you control the trackpad with a stylus. And I think that would take some getting used to as well, but I've never tried it. I've heard people do it. I say do your own research when it comes to these ergonomic tidbits. I don't have all the answers myself, so you probably want to do some other further research before you make any official decision regarding ergonomics. I'm just giving my 2 cents from what I've learned over the years. I would say that I definitely had my worst case of it probably about 4 years ago. And the fact that I haven't experienced it as severely since then probably says that whatever I've been doing has been somewhat helpful. Otherwise, it would be progressively getting worse. Somehow it's not. As far as the keyboard goes, I know some people will get a split keyboard and then they have it angled somewhat like this. Remember how I was talking about the natural hand position? I suppose since I did that earlier, where I just held the mouse in the air and it naturally went into this type of position, you could probably use that as a test to see where your natural position is. And you could compare it with what you always do, and you might notice a pretty big difference. So that might actually be worth experimenting with potentially. But regarding the ergonomic keyboard, I don't have an ergonomic keyboard right now. I haven't really seen much of a need to at this point, but I think my next keyboard probably will end up being a split keyboard just because it is meant to be ergonomic friendly, and I do use the keyboard and mouse like several hours a day, so I probably will want to switch to something like that in the future. But for now, I've been rocking this one. You will see that some keys are missing, or some lettered printouts are. That's because of how much I've been using it over the years. But if I do end up getting a new keyboard, I'm probably gonna switch to a split one. And I'll maybe let you guys know in the future what ends up happening there. But you might also consider looking at other resources if you want to learn more about that too. Something else you'll probably notice is I'm standing right now as well. And that's because I have a standing desk converter on my desk. And when I'm working on the computer, I like to do that more than sitting. We know that sitting can be kind of bad for us if we do it over a long period of time. So I like to stand primarily for that reason. But I've also noticed some other interesting benefits as a result of doing that. So I should probably also clarify, I typically sit when I'm watching videos and stuff like that, or I'm having a snack or something. And I stand pretty much every other time. It will depend on the day and the mood and all those things. Sometimes I do sit while working, but most of the time I stand, and I tend to prefer that nowadays. I also had a pretty intense arc on my back, like probably a few years ago. I think it's not as bad as it used to be now, but I feel like using the standing desk most of the time might be a huge part of why that sort of somewhat corrected itself over time. My back definitely was feeling quite awful. My lower back, I have had problems with that quite a bit, but I'm definitely noticing that a lot less now that I'm standing most of the time rather than sitting. I remember seeing like a video on YouTube where someone talked about basically undo the problems that come with sitting, and I think most of it involves exercising the hip flexor muscles or something like that. So I would maybe do some research into that if you do a lot of sitting. And some of these exercises can actually tell where you are with that. Like if you get really sore while doing it, or you have a hard time doing these exercises, then you are probably experiencing effects from sitting a long time. So as you can imagine, doing those exercises will probably help with that. And if you get good at them, then you're probably set from that perspective. I haven't really looked into that a whole lot, so you might want to do your own research when it comes to that sort of thing. I just wanted to let you know that that is potentially a thing that's worth looking into. Another thing that I really like about using a standing desk, besides now my back feels a lot better, I feel like it kind of does help me sleep at night a little bit too, because I am on the computer for most of the day, and standing is just better for me overall, and it makes me feel a bit more exhausted at night, which probably helps a lot. I also find it incredibly helpful for mental clarity as well. So a lot of times when I'm trying to think, because a lot of my computer work involves a lot of pretty technical and heavy thinking, and having a clear mind is pretty critical when you're doing that sort of stuff. And standing versus sitting definitely helps with having a clear mind, and probably staying more awake too, to be quite frank. So yeah, I often find myself, if I'm brainstorming or something, I naturally find myself walking around the environment, and that's a natural response to standing. If I were sitting, I'd probably just be sitting. And I think my mind is a lot clearer if I'm able to just do that, walk around while thinking and stuff. So yeah, that's why you see me use a clip-on, mainly because that's what I've always had, but it's kind of nice for standing as well. So that's a nice reason to have a clip-on mic too, if you like to do videos while standing. That's what I do most of the time. So yeah, I mean, it's weird because I've gotten used to sitting over the years while using the computer, but now when I'm sitting and working, I almost cringe because it feels awful. My back actually starts to feel kind of awful, even if I'm sitting in a good posture. And I'm like, I've had it. I need to stand. I cannot stand this anymore. So then I stand and I feel a lot better. My mind does behave a lot more clearly as well. I also find that when I'm doing typing tests, for example, just because I do a lot better with my typing tests while I'm standing versus sitting. I think that probably says something as well. And then something I also like to do that I find myself doing a lot more naturally while standing is, we know that if we look at the computer screen for a long time, that could potentially cause eye strain because you're not blinking as often as you should be and that sort of thing. But I find that when I'm standing, I tend to look at the screen look away from the screen way more frequently than when I'm sitting. So that's also better for my eyes as well. I also do that while I'm sitting too now. So like pretty much anytime I'm thinking, especially if I'm programming or something, I tend to look away from the screen while I'm thinking. It's a habit that I somehow built over the years and I can't stop. Even if I wanted to, I just can't think very clearly unless I'm looking away from the screen. And I find that I do that several times per minute while I'm programming. I tend to look away from the screen, so I think that's also probably better for my eyes as well. Even if you do just sit and you want to improve your eye health with computers, I would say anytime you do any amount of thinking, look away from the computer screen while you're thinking. Then look back at it when you need to do stuff again. So that's not a bad habit to build either, in my opinion. And I find that I'm a lot more prone to doing that while I'm standing versus sitting, especially if I'm pacing around the room thinking. Of course, I'm going to be looking away from the screen while doing that. So, yeah. If I'm playing video games or something, I'm probably going to be sitting doing that. But most of the time, I like to stand. It feels a lot better now. At first, it was a bit annoying because I was having the lower back issues while standing, and I felt it a lot more, but now it just doesn't happen as much. So I'm sure standing quite a bit. In fact, those issues were probably caused by some sort of adjustment that was being made to the body from standing. The fact that I no longer feel that pain probably means that whatever adjustments were going to happen have happened now. So that probably has benefits for that reason too. So that's why you see me standing for most of my videos. I just prefer that. And I'm working on something right now, so it makes sense. Like, I'm making a video, I'm working on that now, and I'm gonna be standing for that. Sometimes I do sit, but it's pretty rare for videos, but I find I can think a lot clearer, and that's kind of important for videos if we're being honest. If I was doing this same talk while sitting, I think my mind would blank out a lot more and I probably wouldn't be able to think as effectively. So yeah, those are pretty much my thoughts on ergonomics. If you have any insights or thoughts of your own, feel free to let us know down in the comments section. I'm always fascinated to hear other people's perspective, especially since I think this is something where something that works for one person may not work as well for another person. Or some people do stuff that naturally works really well for them, so they barely even give it any thought, where somebody else doing the same thing would heavily benefit from it if they knew about this thing, or they had this habit that they were doing. So yeah, if you have any thoughts or insights, definitely let me know. If you have any corrections, same thing, but I would prefer that you establish your credibility and why I should listen to you if you had any of that advice. And that could mean explaining your personal experience or else actually referencing some valid research, like preferably peer-reviewed journals or something. So yeah, those are my current thoughts about ergonomics. I just wanted to share that real quick. And also have an excuse to talk about why I'm suddenly using a trackball.